When I went outside to retrieve the mail from the mailbox on a Saturday afternoon, I saw an envelope among the bills. I went inside and placed the bills down, not realizing it was from a firm named Genosis and addressed to my 10-year-old. Jimmy was back in the backyard after picking up the odd envelope from the junk mail and advertisements on the table. He's currently on a football squad and is constantly playing with the neighborhood kids, kicking a football with one of them. Passionate about it, so I signed him. He began playing at the age of 7 and has liked it ever since. I wasn't very fond of. I wanted to join a team, but a lot of his buddies were playing football, so I now go to all of his games and have come. Football is still my preferred sport, even if I never played it since. To be honest, I wasn't particularly. I observed him practicing with the ball at school, flicking it after bouncing it in the air a few times. I have to confess that his friend is improving and appears to be a natural at the game. In fact, his instructor even recommended that I buy him. I had some money saved up, and Sarah and I were considering enrolling him in a football summer camp to demonstrate his abilities. When I called him, he responded, "What's up, Dad?" and ran over, grinning and perspiring. "Know what? This is Jimmy." He revealed the document and claimed that Mrs. Parker had given it to him as a prank gift at Mike's birthday celebration. It was a test to see where your family is from, and Mike Parker is one of the funny gifts. He glanced at the first page and gave it back to me, seemingly uninterested, like our neighbors down the street. He was anxious to return to his friend. "But wait, she gave you a test." "That's all, Dad." "Yes, that was very foolish." After she sealed the tube after we had spit into it, I laughed and forgot about it. It was clearly the outcome of a DNA test you take and then mail off, but I believe she sent it in. "Mrs. Parker gave you this after reading the results. She thought it would be entertaining to deliver them to Mike." I took a few moments to look at all the children at the party and replied, "You sure? This is your test, I believe. My name is at the—" Mrs. Parker replied. I frowned at Jimmy's top. "Sarah and I are primarily Irish with a small amount of English and Scottish, as evidenced by the incorrect ethnicity at the beginning of the name. Jimmy has some Spanish, North African, and Scottish ancestry in addition to a minor amount of other European ancestry, regions, and a little Middle Eastern. So I was curious whether they confused his results with those of another child. You say, Mrs. Parker, give you the test." Indeed, she promised to mail it in, and a few weeks later, Jimmy spotted my bewildered look and inquired, "Is everything okay, Dad? It's just for fun, you know." I said, Sure. And I walked back outside to play since I couldn't believe it. I checked the address book that my wife keeps on the desk and discovered the Parker's number, so I called their home and said, "Hello, Jane." "Hello, Mike. Thank you for inviting Jimmy. This is Mike Johnson, Jimmy's father from down the street. Mike is a good youngster who behaves well, and I'm delighted he was able to attend his birthday celebration a few weeks ago. We received the results. Returned from Jimmy's DNA test. Did you administer this test to him during the party? He didn't complete it on his own. I mailed in the test after helping all the boys with it. Is everything okay?" I said, trying to sound casually, "Thank you for the test. Please wish Mike a happy birthday on my behalf." Examine the test once more. How is this possible given that neither my family nor I have any Spanish or North African ancestry? I didn't think so, Sarah, but then I had a terrible thought that I didn't want to think was possible. In any case, I called Sarah's sister Lisa, hoping I was mistaken. "Hello, Lisa, Mike." "Hey, Mike. How may I help you? I was just wondering when we'll see you again." "You're very kind, Mike. I was at your house for dinner 2 weeks ago, and on Monday I saw Sarah. It sounded like I was a stranger," and she laughed. "Oh, I see. You're welcome. I wanted to check in to see how you were doing when we went shopping." "Been doing lately? I'm doing great, thank you," she said. A little later, I asked if she had seen Frank lately, and she replied. After a little period of silence, she said, "Hune is not my favorite subject." I said, "Oh, Hune has been out of my. Years have passed, and I don't want him back in my life." She smiled and said, "I know he's an A. You're still keeping your distance from him because you're upset with him. I don't care where he is now. You were right where. Where is he from?" I always thought he had a little Spanish appearance, so I was a little taken aback by what she said next. "Yes, his mother was born here, but you're right. He does have a slight Spanish accent. Is his father a Moroccan immigrant?" "I'm simply having a discussion. I have no idea what it is, but it's Algeria." In order to keep her from hearing how choked up I was, I covered the phone as I responded, my voice catching in my throat. Answer immediately. Lisa asked Mike whether he was still there. Sorry, I had to cough. I just wanted to call and say hello and see if you're mad at me or something, I murmured, clenching my throat. Although I'm angry with you since you were my sister, I will always love my nephew and niece because I know you're a wonderful aunt and we all adore you. Don't be a stranger. It never happened, Mike. He will talk to you later, Lisa. I felt uneasy when I saw you, but I knew that Sarah would never be unfaithful to me, especially with Frank. She didn't like him, and everyone in our family knew he was a slime ball before he and Lisa broke up. Was having an affair with Lisa until he was discovered having an affair with a neighbor's wife. Poor Lisa W. As a basket case till they're split. I glanced out the window to see my son having a great time with his friend. He had grown significantly taller this year. I was always envious of how easily his skin was tanned, and his short trimmed hair was coarse and black as coal. Jimmy, I never tan, embraced the sun's transition from white to tan without getting scorched. If I spend too much time in the sun, I quickly turn lobster red before it peels off with strange freckles and appears like. Sarah never lays out in the sun, which is fantastic because I adore her. I reassure her that she shouldn't be concerned about becoming tanned, because we usually wear a lot of sunscreen when we go to the. I hated to think about it, but a seed of doubt was sown, and I started to take into account my son's appearance and acknowledge that Sarah and I differed in a few ways, the most obvious of which was his height. It was obvious that Jimmy would be tall and slender even at the age of 10. He had incredible development the previous year and is now. He is taller than every child in his class and is becoming more athletic every day, but Sarah and I are not that. Sarah was tall, slender, and athletic, making her a sexy, fun-loving Amazon. She was in her final year of college, thickly built, athletic, and light white when I first met her, and a sweet round face. Although I never learned much about her, I've heard from a number of people that she spent a lot of. I was fortunate that she pursued frat boys and went to drinking parties throughout her time in school, since that's how I met her. We still occasionally go out to bars, drink too much, dance, and have a great time. I weigh 220 pounds and am just under 6 feet tall, 4 inches taller than my plump wife. I maintain a healthy lifestyle by working out, doing some training, and occasionally jogging in the park next to our house. I have never taken. You wouldn't consider myself particularly athletic, and I was never good enough to be on a team in any organized sports. I'm not very attractive, but I'm also not a stud, and I performed well in school and received good grades. Since I enjoy manual labor, I currently work in robotics for a small local robotics company. Everyone in the family was aware that when Lisa originally introduced Frank to me, he came across as pretty conceited, but he's genuinely a kind man who was conscious of his appearance, despite Sarah's remarks about how lovely he was. She found Frank to be conceited and unbearable, and we later learned that he was a serial skirt chaser. Cheater. Now that I was looking at my son differently, I noticed a similarity that perhaps Sarah had fallen for. In contrast to me, Frank was tall, black, and attractive, and he was nearly half. He was a foot taller than me, had a muscular build akin to a male model, and excelled in local sports and school athletics. Hero. I've heard that he still participated in organized sports. I believe Lisa was initially drawn to him because of his passion for sports. His rude taunting of my wife was especially offensive to me because I work as a salesman selling used vehicles. There were several scathing remarks on her appearance and other rude topics, so I was shocked that Sarah didn't stop him. Immediately, as I had anticipated, she simply attempted to sidestep his critique and make it sound like a joke. I served as an usher for their wedding, which was lovely, but Frank looked foolish at the ceremony. Sarah was the bride. He was intoxicated and making advances on numerous ladies, according to Lisa's father. I wanted to reprimand him for something, but I pretended to be nice because he was getting married to Lisa. It was challenging since he is a low-class idiot with a loud, booming voice and a constant, annoyingly loud chuckle. Mike Sarah was crying behind me, and even though he didn't know anything about the subject being addressed, he had something to say. I almost jumped out of my skin when my wife entered the room and noticed how shocked I was. "What's wrong?" I laughed, "Honey. Did I just frighten you a little?" She set the grocery bag down, arrived, hugged me, and kissed my cheek while pressing her ample body against my back. "Hey, lover," she said. "While I was shopping, I was thinking about you." "Oh my goodness. She put her arms around my waist, and I wondered how like you did to me last Friday, I would like to drag you upstairs, throw you on our bed, and abuse my attractive husband today. That sounds like a rather bold night, and I laughed with the nearby kids. Unfortunately, she sighed with amusement. But perhaps I'll let you abuse me if you're good. We'll have to wait and see whether you're game tonight. She slapped me on the butt and giggled. You coy freak, she laughed. All right, we'll see. Just remember that she was grinning as she went to the table and started taking the food out of the bag. Please go, she murmured pleasantly. There's a dear, honey. She reminded me to remember tonight and to grab the remaining items out of the van while I prepare some lunch. Smiling, I won't. This was my devoted wife's usual manner over the 12. We've cherished our marriage for more than a decade, and she demonstrates her love in a variety of ways. So, I never imagined she would cheat on me. I adore her figure. She can arouse my interest with a seductive glance, a tender kiss, or a gentle murmur. I appreciate it when she initiates sex and love. She's really forceful. How can she be so loving if she's cheating on me? It doesn't make since Sarah has always expressed her sexual urges so strongly. I almost forgot about it today. I'm relieved she didn't spot Jimmy's DNA results on the counter, because I slipped them into the desk drawer as I was leaving the kitchen, and once I was outside, my mind was completely elsewhere. My mother was unable to conceive after I was born due to problems during childbirth. Thus, I was the only kid. My problem was that, although my parents were very kind towards me, my mother stayed at home to look after me. We would play catch or toss a football around when my dad got home from work, and then we would eat. He would take us to the park to play, and we would swim in the lake after dinner, and then watch TV as a family. Unfortunately, he smoked excessively during the summer and passed away from a severe form of cancer at a very early age. Even though he was older than my mother, he was still quite young to pass away in that manner. I was sorry to see it, losing him, but I was only 8 years old when I realized how much my mother took it personally. We shared an apartment and we didn't have much money after my dad passed away, and my mom was depressed and didn't work. Was left to raise a little son on her own since she was unable to manage the flat, pay the bills, and own. So as my mom's melancholy deepened, we moved in with my Aunt Betty, who had never married. My aunt attempted to tend to her. I was aware of my mother's issues and made an effort to stay out of them, which is how I spent my early living essentially without either parent. My mom was too depressed to give me much care, and my dad had passed away. Aunt Betty struggled to make ends meet. My aunt saw a doctor who prescribed medication for my mom when she, sadly, the carefree, enjoyable period I had before my father passed away was finished, and life turned into going to school, eating dinner, watching TV, and going to bed was a dull, lonely routine. I had a few friends and played with them on the weekends, but overall, life after my father's passing wasn't very enjoyable, even though I made it through high school, had good marks, attended college, and met Julie, my first wife, who was a beautiful. When we were young and in similar courses, we began dating, and all of a sudden, everything was wonderful again. I spent the remainder of the day studying with Julie, dating Julie, and having sex with Julie after attending classes all day. She was the passion of my life for a few years after we were engaged at the young age of 21. Mom passed away from depression and a shattered heart months before graduation. Her passing had a greater impact on me than any physical illness. I attended the burial with my fiancée C and was astonished by the low turnout. Having been a shoo-in for so long, she had little social relationships outside of. There were barely a dozen or so people there when Julie and I returned, compared to Aunt Betty and my elderly grandmother Edith. We both worked part-time jobs to pay for a small studio apartment while we attended school to complete our studies. We planned plans for when we were apart and had sex every day, if not more, because we were so in love and wonderful together. School, and after we graduated alone, I met her parents, who were kind and amiable to me. Nobody from my family was there. Attended, so it wasn't shocking that Julie found work in advertising after school agency, and I began working for a trucking firm that wanted someone to help them develop a new supply chain with the ability to program their delivery devices using software, which was just what I needed now that we were both making Julie had stopped using the contraceptive pill after going through a difficult time, and we were planning to start a family. After a difficult period, things were finally improving for us. We had been together for 3 years. Then, in the most senseless catastrophe, Julie was struck by an intoxicated driver at a traffic light on her way home from work. I was expecting our first kid when she passed away, so I could picture us having a child. The intoxicated driver died as well, and they were unable to save the infant. I was heartbroken. I attended her burial and almost passed out on the. Her father had to help me get out of the coffin and lead me outside, where I puked. Dozens of people were watching me sob as I stumbled away. I was so upset that I couldn't even go to. I went through hell the day after the funeral, and I quit my job for the next 6 months. I was temporarily homeless after losing my flat, but Julie's parents helped me out by giving me money and attempting to get me into the therapy they scheduled appointments, but I never showed up. I know they meant well, but after a while, the sight of them brought back memories of my deceased wife. After speaking with them a few times, I never returned. Later, I requested money for alcohol and obtained food from A. I spent a lot of time unconscious and intoxicated after attending a church that provided me with a hot lunch in the afternoon. Aunt Betty managed to. I was so furious at the world that I was unable to comply with her request to return home and live with her and Grandma Edith. I thought of my melancholy mother and how difficult it was for her to care for me. I didn't want. I ended up sleeping in abandoned cars or on unoccupied porches for a while in order to put her in that predicament once more. Even though they claim that everything is healed with time, the hole in my heart remained unhealed. I became more hungry and ashamed of how badly I crashed the longer I was on the streets. The preacher at the church where I was having dinner started giving me advice and helped me land a job stocking shelves in a supermarket. Shelves at night, which resulted in a second employment in a warehouse with the same automated supply system I worked on at the trucking company, and after my supervisor discovered that I could program their delivery electronics, I was employed full-time. I was able to obtain a flat and begin to overcome my depression after I had saved up some money. Was still drinking a lot to get over Julie's passing, but I had gained some self-esteem and found some friends. On Friday nights, I would go to clubs and check out with buddies from work with whom I could go out and drink girls and get inebriated. I had a terrific time at a frat party near college, and I was invited by a man. I met Sarah the following weekend when I returned for another party. There must have been hundreds of people at the frat home with all the attractive co-eds. It was a very crazy scenario that diverted my attention. The music, and if we hadn't ended up in the same beer queue, I wouldn't have noticed Sarah. I was still intoxicated, and she was also a big girl with a creamy complexion who was overweight but not obese. She had a cute face flushed, a white complexion, shoulder-length auburn hair, and a colorful tattoo on her shoulder. From alcohol, we were waiting to fill our cups with beer while standing next to each other. I struck up a conversation with Julie, a fun girl who was 3 years younger than me, kind, and had a lovely smile. I didn't intend to start a serious relationship, but there was something about this large, boisterous. We talked or yelled because the music was so loud, and then we went outside to talk with a woman who had a tattoo that caught my attention. She took out a joint and asked if I wanted to smoke it. Of course I did, and we drank some more. More smoked one more, and before I left, I made sure to get her number because we essentially clicked that first night. Instructed me to give her a call, and we continued to hang out after that. I discovered that she was a little self-conscious, but I told her that she looked fantastic and that she was ideal for me because I adore a big. When she heard that, the attractive woman with curves and a little extra muscle on her bones grinned, her blue eyes flashing, and her. We had sex on our second date, and it was absolutely amazing. Her adorable face lit up, and we couldn't sleep quickly enough. Extremely powerful woman, and although I knew she was overweight, I was shocked by how combative she seemed. Fantastic, and informed her, so I told her that she was ideal for me since I adore large, attractive women with curves and a little extra. Meat on her bones, she heard that and smiled, her blue eyes flashed, and her cute face lit up. We couldn't get to bed quick enough. We had sex on our second date, and it was incredible. She's a very strong girl, and I was surprised how aggressive she was. My first wife was slim and petite. We take time to kiss and use lots of foreplay before we started sex. Our love making was slow and romantic Sarah was more direct. She'd make out with me and let me play with her for a bit, but if she was horny and I took too long to get to the main event, she just yanked down my pants and tell me to do her. We went out to parties and clubs a lot in those days. On the occasions when Sarah had been drinking, which was quite often, she would become very aroused if we were out and about. It was not unusual for her to suggest something and take me somewhere private like her car in the parking lot or out back of the club and tell me to have sex with her. There were many nights I would find myself getting a BJ behind a restaurant. I was not used to such a demanding and assertive lover, but I was not complaining. I adored her. Long story short, a few years after I came out of my shell, when I said I'd never love again, I fell in love with Sarah and asked her to marry me. Thankfully, she agreed. We had a short engagement, and then we married. Looking back on my sad life, meeting her was the best therapy I could have ever asked for. I was 27, she was 24. We had a big traditional Catholic wedding thanks to her wonderful parents. Sarah comes from an unusual Irish-American family. The wedding was held in her family's church, which is run by the priest. I met so many of her relatives that I couldn't remember them all. We drank a lot and sang Irish songs at the reception. It's a wonder we could even have sex on our wedding night. But let me assure you we did. Her parents are really great people. They met me and welcomed me into their family right away. I appreciated them too. Even before we got married, we ate dinner with them regularly. They paid most of the money for our wedding and even gave us tickets to a resort in Florida for our honeymoon. I consummated my marriage dozens of times with my lovely Irish bride. I couldn't have asked for a better outcome to my life. I knew Sarah was a hard party girl when I met her. We met at a wild frat party. For Christ's sake, she told me a little about her college life, and I was pleased with her honesty. She didn't. The fact that she dated a lot of guys before me, and that she was still having sex with other guys until we were exclusive. She said she did some things she wished she hadn't. I gave her a brief account of my life, but I tried not to dwell on the worst parts. She knew I was married before, but she didn't care about that. She was glad I could overlook some of her past behavior. The other guys she dated were mostly arrogant, entitled frat boys who were just trying to score. I was the first guy she dated who she could see getting serious with settling down and getting married. I met her sister soon after we started dating. Lisa is a very pretty girl, 2 years older and slimmer than Sarah. We got along really well, and I liked her. She seemed just as high-spirited as her younger sister. Both of them were as spirited as her younger sister. They could drink me under the table. That's when I met Frank, Lisa's long-term boyfriend. He was a few years older than me, and they were engaged. He was working in a gym as a personal trainer. He was definitely buff. He didn't seem to care for me much when we shook hands. I got the impression that he was an arrogant snob. I didn't tell Sarah that Lisa loved him like crazy. That was easy when we went out together. It was all about Frank. He's a big guy with a big mouth who loves being the center of attention. I got tired of his tendency to dominate any conversation, no matter what. Lisa would get drunk and hang all over him. She definitely had the same wild streak in her eyes that Sarah had, but she was engaged to that tall older guy, so she didn't go out partying and get drunk as much as Sarah and I did. I heard Sarah call us for lunch, so I called Jimmy into the house and Susie in from watching TV. We were all around the table eating as I tried to appear normal. Unfortunately, my facade of normality didn't fool my wife. Everything was okay, Mike, Sarah asked me cautiously, training her blue eyes onto my face. Yeah. Fine, you look a little tired, honey. You feeling all right? She asked with concern. Maybe a little tired, I lied. It's been a tough week, I added. Why don't you take a nap after you eat? I'll clean up maybe. We'll see. I was hoping she wouldn't ask me anything more. I couldn't help being distracted by the DNA results in the desk drawer. I was hoping to God that the results were flawed in some way that would take Sarah's attention from me. Jimmy started talking to her about his soccer team. It was a relief. I'm normally pretty direct about issues that come up. Not as much as my non. I don't like beating around the bush if there's a problem with software or a supply issue. I get right to the point and address it immediately. This was different. It was personal, not business. I finally decided there was no reason to rush to judgment until I had a chance to think. Unfortunately, I was so fixated on Jimmy's parentage, I had a hard time sleeping that night. I went to bed early, and Sarah came up not long after. She was very affectionate as she slid into bed, kissed me, and snuggled up to me. When I didn't respond to her affection, she got the message and kissed my cheek. She told me I'd feel better tomorrow. I tried to sleep, but that damn DNA test kept me awake. I couldn't figure out how it could possibly be correct. I tossed and turned for an hour. After an hour, Sarah got up and said angrily, "Are you going to stay up all night, Mike? What's the problem?" "Nothing. I think I've drunk too Much coffee, I'm sorry, but I can't sleep if you're moving around like that all night. I know, I get it. I got up and went to the kitchen for some water. Then I went to the guest room and fell asleep on the bed when I was traveling. It was one of the few nights in our marriage that we didn't sleep together. Sarah didn't say anything about my absence from our bed, but she did look at me with concern as we ate breakfast. After breakfast, I went to the desk and got out the DNA results. I took it out to the garage where I read it over a dozen times in private. The more I read it, the more I thought it might be true, Sarah. And I have had a wonderful 12-year marriage. After 13 years of marriage, we're going to have a 13-year anniversary in a few months, but there was a short time after we married when we had problems. We didn't argue much before we were married, but not long after our honeymoon, we did have some disputes that turned rather ugly at times. I had no idea why she was so irritable. But for the first time since we had got a taste of her harsh Irish temper during this time, it seemed like she wanted to go out more, and I like to go out and party with her. But I sometimes thought we shouldn't for financial reasons. I was working hard in those days, putting in longer hours than I do now. Money was tighter, and we were living in a dumpy one-bedroom apartment. We lived in a small bedroom apartment. And I didn't want to waste our limited resources on frivolous spending in bars. There were also a few times when I had to go away for work, and my boss paid for each trip out of town. Because they were work-related, I had to take some classes on the latest improvements in robot technology and robotics. It moves quickly, and if you don't keep up, you quickly get behind. I was trying to do the best for our future family and needed to stay ahead. Sarah wasn't happy and made that clear. She said she was young and wanted to have fun. She didn't appreciate me traveling without her on this trip, which was my fourth and away from home. Sarah had a major meltdown. I was working hard, and we weren't going out drinking as often. She was already upset that our lifestyle had become boring, but on this occasion, she made plans to attend a big celebration her family was involved in. She said her family and a lot of her friends would be there, and she wanted me to stay home and go with her. She was really upset that I wouldn't be there, even though I thought it was important to go to this class. I loved her family and knew it was a big deal, but our back then family was my top priority, and it still is. I just couldn't see why she didn't understand that if we were going to have kids, we'd need a bigger house and a better financial situation. I was up for a raise and maybe a promotion. Having an education in my field would help me achieve that goal. We both knew that having kids was important, given that we both came from staunch Catholic families. Children were a constant topic of conversation. I remember her parents, George and Norma, pestering Sarah about it so much that she told them to stop. They even asked me how many kids I had. I remember that night we announced our engagement. There were so many times they teased us about having kids during family events. Some of her relatives used to joke that Sarah had the right body for making babies, that she had baby making hips. We all laughed at that. It was a pointed joke, hilarious, yet they both understood they were serious. In reality, I was ready to get her pregnant. On our honeymoon, my new bride was a large, buxom, lovely woman, and I wanted nothing more than to knock her up and have a new kid to spoil. I knew Sarah wanted that too. That was one thing we talked about this length before we married, but she told me, and I agreed with her, that we should wait a few years when our finances were solid. I remember how impoverished I was when I was a kid and wanted more for my family when she told me she wanted to wait but I believed it was a sensible decision. Recalling those chats gave me a chill if she was being honest with me about waiting, and I believed her at the time. How did she get pregnant less than 6 months later? I was utilizing condoms at the time. Since Sarah had difficulties with the pill, I didn't really enjoy condoms, but they were less messy, more complicated than other techniques, spermicides and diaphragms. She made me use them from the time I met her, so I had to get used to them. They worked perfectly right until she told me she was pregnant with Jimmy. I know that no type of protection is entirely flawless. At the time, we just decided that one of my swimmers somehow got past that we used a condom, and it did the job. It was a joyous event for Sarah and me, and for her whole family, who were overjoyed. We celebrated with a wild sexual marathon. I hadn't thought about it till yesterday. After breakfast, Sarah got the kids ready for church. I made an excuse that I wasn't feeling good and told her to go without me. It wasn't a lie. My head was erupting with horrible thoughts regarding how Jimmy's DNA findings had come out so differently from what I would. As anticipated, I returned to my bed while they prepared for Sunday Mass. When they were prepared to depart, Sarah brought the children. Jimmy hugged me and said he hoped I felt better as we went into the bedroom to say our goodbyes. My little princess Susie was all suited up in her white Sunday dress, and she was so adorable that I almost started crying when she planted a kiss on my lips. forehead and advised me to do so. I had already gotten up and eaten when they got home, so I figured I'd sleep and feel better. Sarah prepared dinner for the children, and they all sat down to eat. I sat down at the table with them, but I didn't eat. Listened to Jimmy talking excitedly about something while Susie laughed at something he said. Then Sarah added her remarks, but she was observing me out of the corner of her eye. I spent the remainder of Sunday with my family because I truly love them. Speaking with Sarah outside, I tried to avoid getting into any lengthy discussion since I was worried that if I said too much, I'd. I also played with Susie and her toys, which she adored, but I got choked up and lost it. Jimmy and I kicked the ball around as usual, and he had no trouble handling it while I struggled. He even performed when the ball struck me in the head from his bicycle kick that sent it flying behind him, he laughed a lot, and I was powerless to stop it. I was somewhat of a basket case at work, and I could see that my son had a natural flair for the game because he was easily beating me at it. My supervisor saw that I made a few careless errors in my software programming on Monday, since I was preoccupied with my thoughts. Asked me what was wrong. I gave an explanation, and he advised me to focus on my work and quit worrying. Regarding other matters, I thought I was shocked when Sarah arrived home that day because I had left work early and gone straight home. Without that, he saw and inquired about my condition. I offered an explanation, and he gave me the day to consider it. After he advised me to focus on my work and clear my mind, I left work early and headed straight home. I believe I was taken aback when Sarah returned home that day without the one Susie needed to start school. Nursery anymore. She returned to her job as an administrative assistant with a financial services company. Her hours are adaptable, enabling her to pick up the children after school. She entered the room by herself and appeared sober. I merely groaned when she replied, "You're home early," and the kids were at Lisa's. Waited for me to give an explanation, and when I did, she gently inquired, "Is there anything bothering you, Mike?" She was seated on the couch and had moved in front of me. As she talked, I could see tears welling up in her eyes. She had a really serious expression on her face. Her cheeks were flushed, and I had to make a choice right then. I've been driving myself crazy with my suspicions. Should I put my cards on the table or keep playing around with them? Weekend regarding what to do. Should I pay a lawyer or a private investigator? Or should I just follow her around like a fool attempting to? They're playing a cunning game to get her to confess or go out and get her and her unidentified partner. Invest a lot of money on audio recorders and security cameras to capture her alleged affair. This is my wife. Speaking of the woman I've given my entire life, Sarah is not just any ordinary person. She's a smart cookie. I've been married to her for almost 15 years, and she's the mother of my 2 children. I'm not a CIA operative, or even, as a 10-year-old black belt from SEAL Team 6, I'm a typical middle-class, honest, and hardworking man who can't find out what the devil is going on with my soulmate. I've had enough and have stopped having any suspicions. Finally, it's time to fish or cut bait. Sarah reiterated, "I know something's wrong." Mike is there during the awkward moment. "Something we ought to discuss. Please let me know, honey." I met her gaze and said, "Yeah, I believe there is Sarah's." I had never seen her look so dejected, and it was shattering my heart to see her eyes drop to the coffee table and a tear rolled down her face. I tried my hardest to suppress my feelings before I could say anything because I wanted to hold her and kiss away her tears. Sarah took a paper out of her purse and placed it on the coffee table in front of me before sitting down. I remarked quietly, "Does it have anything to do with this?" while seated in the chair across from the sofa. My eyes opened as I saw Jimmy's. I looked up at her and then down to the fucking DNA results, and I said, "Yes, feeling is horrible as. I discovered it yesterday at church, Jimmy, and I hadn't felt it in 15 years. Informed me about it, saying that you had been distressed since seeing that story, but he was unsure of why I had remained silent because I didn't want to burst into tears, but I had to keep my composure because this was crucial," he continued. I wiped away a tear and told him that I'd talk to you about it. "So what about it?" She said she wanted me to throw it away. After asking, Sarah took a tissue out of her handbag, blew her nose, crumpled it up, and grabbed another to dab at her eyes. I knew immediately what it was about and what you were, I believe, so I've been waiting to speak with you about this for a while, Mike, and I'm so embarrassed, but I phoned Lisa today, and she informed me that you called and inquired about Frank. I can't deny what happened, but you're no idiot, Mike, and you. I apologize, Sarah. I understand that you deserve honesty. God knows how long I've wanted to tell you, but I was unable to. I'll tell you everything now, no excuses. I wanted to tell you but couldn't. I wanted to wait until Jimmy was a little older before telling you about something. But I do love you, you know? How might a little youngster understand that he is not your biological son? Although you are a fantastic father, Mike, even though you weren't his biological father, there is one thing that is unquestionably not the case, and it was Frank. I am truly sorry for the error I made early in our marriage. I was disappointed in myself for allowing it to occur, but once I became pregnant, there was nothing I could do about it. Up the baby, you understand my family and my upbringing, and I knew that if you discovered the truth, I wouldn't be able to let it go. She inhaled deeply and looked directly at me, saying, I need to wait, Mike. It could ruin our family. She added, her voice trembling. I mean, I had to wait till Jimmy was old enough because I knew you'd be unhappy in any case, but I couldn't let my treachery destroy his boyhood. Mike, you must believe me when I say that I never intended to cause you or our family any harm. I understand that the truth could ruin us, but you could be correct. She was upset by that statement, which I murmured violently, and she spoke very gently. I had hearing problems, and I knew that man would never be accountable or a parent to Jimmy, unlike you, Mike. I knew you were the one for me practically from the moment we first met, and ever since we got married, you've been the ideal husband. For me, loving, responsible, devoted, and hardworking, I realized how much I loved you. Instead of attempting to squeeze support out of that, Jimmy would have a great life with you as his father. Sarah lowered her eyes and said, I knew that the jerk I was with would never step up. Remained silent for a minute. If my calculations are accurate, I could hear the clock ticking in the adjacent room. After our honeymoon, you must have been cheating on him. Even a few months later, you continued to do so. Said firmly, had sex with him a few times and got pregnant with Jimmy after, with a frown and narrowed eyebrows. I haven't seen or heard from that jerk since Lisa and I never spoke to him or allowed him to touch me again. I suppose I'm forced to believe you since I'm divorced and I don't want to see him again. She took a few deep breaths, but it was difficult to reach the point where I'd rather not, Mike. Breaths and added, but if you want God, I will. But she broke down in tears. I know you. I've been considering and preparing this talk for years. I'm sorry, but the specifics won't help at all. Will not be pleased to hear them, but I owe you so much that I will never again lie to you or keep anything from you. Even though I was struggling to keep my composure while listening to her startling admission, I was certain that I wanted to hear the specifics. I bit my lip and asked a question that I really didn't want to ask because I had to ask one that was truly bothering me. That I was aware Jimmy wasn't biologically at least not, but I felt As I waited for her response, my heart was racing. Damn it, of course she is, Mike muttered sharply. Sarah got up and entered our den, and I heard her unlocking some doors, so I don't blame you for asking given the circumstances. Drawers, and after a few absence, she came back holding a folder on which she placed 2 documents. She informed me that Jimmy and Susie had both been examined at the table adjacent to the DNA findings. Several years ago, she had both of them checked since she was aware of the results, even though she already knew what they were. This subject would eventually come up during our talk, and Sarah pointed up a few charts on the. She told me, as you can see, Mike, Jimmy has a different father than you now, with a relieved expression on her face. I understand, but this page demonstrates that Susie is yours. It struck me how long she'd. I felt like an ignorant, gullible chump who had been prepared for this conversation, and I was completely off balance. I was now being skillfully manipulated by a crafty smooth I was referring to. An adulterous relationship, as I always knew Sarah was a clever, shrewd, and resolute wife, but I never. Mike, I can promise you that she continued to act in such a cold and manipulative manner following my horrible error. I've been totally yours ever since my affair, but I haven't cheated on you or had any affairs. Desire to do so. With anybody else, I've prayed a lot for forgiveness and hoped that God would. I asked for your forgiveness, and I have made an effort to be the best person I can be for you and our family. Even if we are unable to get past this, I hope you know that I'm the best wife and mother I can be. Her brave exterior broke her. She started crying as she fled the room, her red face breaking into tears. I realized it was difficult for her to come clean, and I valued her candor, but it didn't cheer me much. Inst. Ad. I looked at the papers on the table, where at least two were mine, but then I snorted angrily and mentally slapped myself because I was upset. Jimmy is also mine, and I said, damn that witch. I adore him. Tears came quickly, and I cried for a short while. How did I feel? Strangely enough, I felt a warped sense of relief that my wife was an ing witch, but at least all of that made me feel less angry than merely numb. My suspicions were validated, and I was relieved to no longer have to wonder if she had cheated on me. Even though I was aware of the truth, it was shocking to consider throwing objects across the room, punching the wall, or even hiring a hitman. My mind was racing, and I felt a little queasy, so I walked to our bedroom and found Sarah. Man to kill my wife's lover. I was crying on the bed and was at a loss for words, so I whispered to Sarah, it's okay, I'm very sorry, Mike. I love you so much. She turned her head to face you, her eyes red and teary. I'm not sure how I feel, but I told her the truth, so please don't hate me. She sobbed and added, I'm so sorry. I'm a fool and did something wrong. I would have told you sooner if I wanted to give our son the life he deserved and a loving father. Please believe me when I say that I was concerned because, as a mother, I had to provide Jimmy a loving father who would teach him. That wouldn't have happened if I had told you earlier. I suppose you didn't believe me, but you were correct. I'm not sure how I would have said back then, but nothing made me happier than being the proudest parent when you gave birth to our kid. I suppose both Jimmy and I profited from your deceit because it was my fantasy come true and you made it happen. I understand your reasoning, but you could be correct. Oh, Mike, I was in a tough situation. I loved you, but I had to do. The hardest thing was keeping the secret from you, but it was the only option I could think of at the time, and it was what was best for our son. She sat up in bed and took my hand, Mike, if you don't mind. I've never had to keep a secret this long. I know Jimmy, and I will do everything in my power to support us during this difficult time. I will always love you. And Susie won't either, I said, removing my hand. I hope you get that I can't think about the future at the moment. I need to take it all in and figure out how to resolve this because it's only fair, she said. I just want to know if you're willing to forgive me and maintain our relationship as she regains her self-control. I abruptly blurted out, I'll try my best to make it up to you, family. We'll do whatever it takes. Sarah's. As she nervously watched me, her face turned pale and her eyes widened. I repeated, we said we. Does anyone else know I had? To inform Lisa, she grudgingly acknowledged that she was aware of my tears of shock, and my wife's head briefly lowered before. Sarah said softly, but she gave me a pitying look when I didn't. Tell her right away. Saw that Jimmy's appearance changed as he grew older, and she realized her husband was a. My wife knew everything she squeaked because she thought I might be susceptible to slick-talking Romeo's line of nonsense. One night when Jimmy was about 5 years old, she got drunk and began sobbing to me about Frank's affairs and how she knew he was. I wanted to tell her that I was cheating on her, but she wouldn't stop and asked me directly if I had done anything. Couldn't, so you told her about Jimmy, I said bitterly. She just kept on talking as if she hadn't heard me. Her eyes were staring into space, and she was speaking in a slow, monotone voice, as if she were reciting a speech. I told her that I'd fooled around with him before we were married. My God, Sarah, I cried despair. This just keeps getting worse. While they weren't engaged yet, and we hadn't become exclusive either. I went out with him a few times while I was still in school. Lisa got drunk and passed out on a few occasions, and Frank and I were alone in their apartment with Lisa unconscious. He came on to me. He a good. I was flattered by all the attention, and I admit I gave into his constant flattery and pressure. We had sex a few times before we were married. We were just starting to date. I was ashamed that I had betrayed my own sister, but it was too late at that point. You told her that I hated to, but we were both drinking heavily, and the liquor was like a truth serum. When she asked me, I told her that I was angry with you for leaving me when we had that family reunion a few months after our honeymoon. I also told her that I was angry with you because you're a stupid person. I know that now. That guy's an SLE bag. I know that now. I went out with him that night. I just wanted a night of fun and to have a few drinks. Lisa wasn't around for some reason, and I was angry at you. We hadn't been going out very often anymore, and I miss my old lifestyle. I mean, I used to go to all the parties and the clubs. He took me dancing, and got me drunk. Then he took me outside and had sex with me in the back seat of his car. I'm sorry, Mike, but that's what happened. I knew it had something to do with those training trips. I said, no, I don't want to. I knew you were upset with me, but I never suspected you'd cheat. I haven't been going out much recently, and I've been missing my old lifestyle, going to all the parties and clubs. He took me dancing, got me drunk, then he took me outside and had sex with me in the back seat of his car. I'm sorry, Mike, but that's what happened. I knew it had something to do with those training trips. I said, no, I knew you were upset with me, but I never suspected you'd cheat. I was stupid and drunk and regretted it afterwards, but I didn't stop. I did stop. I didn't want anything to do with him after that night. He kept on calling me every time you left town. He would hit on me behind my sister's back. The guy's a born cheater and was relentless. That's when he knocked you up. I asked, not sure if I wanted the answer. Yeah, I was smashed. As I said, I wasn't so drunk that I didn't make him use protection. He had condoms in his pocket. He probably knew he was getting in my pants. When we got into his car, I made him put one on before he did me. So how did you get pregnant? She lowered her head shamefaced and said I was pretty drunk and it was late, so he took me home. Once he got me into the bedroom, he did me again. I don't remember much about that one. The next morning I demanded he leave, but he wouldn't go without having me once more. I finally gave in and let him stay just to get him out of the house. When he finally left, I realized I'd made the biggest mistake of my life. I jeopardized my marriage to you and my relationship with Lisa. I just hoped no one would find out about my stupidity. So if he used condoms, how'd you get pregnant? He used condoms, but one of them broke. I didn't know at the time and thought I'd managed to avoid the issue. You came home, we had sex, and I promised myself I'd never make that mistake again. A few weeks later, I had some strange sensations and started having morning sickness. I took a home pregnancy test when you were away and found out I was 6 weeks pregnant. I was furious. I called him up and told him off. I never saw him again after that. So that's how it happened. I told Lisa the truth that night when she confronted me. She was so angry. She hit me. I had to fight her off. I don't think she spoke to me for a month after that. When she confronted Frank about it, he admitted we had sex. She divorced him. I thought she caught him with a neighbor's wife. That's the story we made up by that time. It was years later, and Jimmy was around, for I'd already decided not to tell you the truth. Lisa understood my problem and promised she wouldn't say anything to you. We made it part of their divorce settlement that Frank had to move away and never come back to receive favorable treatment in the divorce. I've never heard or seen him since, and neither has she. So the truth finally comes out. You and Frank are. I spat out bitterly. No wonder he treated me like such a chump. He knew my son was really his and was probably laughing at me the whole time. He knew you both turned me into an unsuspecting cuck. For years, Sarah studied my face intently. I'm as sorry as I could be, Mike, she said. If I could go back in time, I'd never do anything with him. I never would have gone out drinking with him and let him seduce me. I've been carrying this burden for years. I was in a daze. This was too much information, and I felt drained. I got up from the bed and walked toward the door. Please don't go, she pleaded. I want to help you, Mike. I really do. I need you with us. We all do. You have to believe me. I only did it so Jimmy could have a decent life and have a great male role model to look up to. She sniffled and whispered, I need you too. I know it won't be easy, but I want you, and I need you. I've loved you for all these years. I know you might not think so right now, but I do. Lisa knows the secret. I had to tell her. She kept pressuring me like she already knew at the time. I wondered if Frank had told her. Had she already been told by Frank? Was she testing me to see if I'd be truthful with her? I hope not. Sarah's face suddenly turned even more pale. She lowered her eyes and began to fidget nervously. What now? I asked impatiently. Who else? She took a deep breath and admitted that there was one more person she hadn't spoken to in years, but it was possible. They knew who. A friend from college. We had a falling out, but she was with me the night Frank and I hooked up. She saw us leave together and called me a home wrecker when I told her what happened. I haven't spoken to her since, but I suspect she might have told someone. Basically everyone but me knew about this. No, Mike, it's not like that. I swear I've done everything to keep this secret from ruining our relationship, except for the actual cheating part. One muttered bitterly. Now our family's life is built on this secret. It was a mistake, Mike. I'm begging you, please don't let this tear us apart. I looked at her standing there in tears, desperate and ashamed. Part of me wanted to comfort her, but another part wanted to rage at the betrayal. I need time to think, Mike. Please don't leave, she pleaded. I'm not leaving, I said, but I can't be around you right now. I need to clear my head. I walked out of the room, feeling more conflicted than I ever had in my life. The woman I loved had betrayed me, and everything I thought I knew about my family was now in question, but I wasn't going to make any Rash decisions I needed to think over the next few days. I tried to avoid Sarah. As much as I could, I went to work, came home, and spent time with the kids, but I didn't talk to her more than was necessary at night. I slept in the guest room, which was awkward and painful, but I needed the distance to figure out my next step. Sarah tried several times to approach me, but I wasn't ready to have a heart with her yet. One evening, after a particularly difficult day at work, I found myself in the garage staring at the DNA results again. That's when I made a decision. I wasn't going to let Sarah off the hook easily, but I also wasn't going to let this destroy my relationship with Jimmy and Susie. They were my children regardless of biology, and I was going to be there for them. I called my friend Dave, who's a lawyer I trust. One told him what was going on, and he said he'd help me figure out the legal stuff. We talked about the possibility of divorce, custody issues, and how to protect my interests. I wasn't sure I wanted a divorce, but I needed to know my options. The next weekend, I told Sarah we needed to talk. We sat down in the living room, and I laid out my conditions. Sarah, I'm not sure what the future holds for us, but I need to set some ground rules if we're going to try and work through this. Anything, Mike, I'll do anything. Yes. She said. Her eyes were red and puffy from crying. First, I want a post-nuptial agreement. It'll protect me and the kids financially if we do end up divorcing. She nodded. Second, I need you. We're both going to therapy, but you need to work through whatever led you to betray me in the first place. She agreed. Third, you need to be completely honest with me from now on. No more secrets, no more lies. If I find out you've hidden anything else from me, we're done. I swear, Mike, no more secrets. Finally, I said, I need time. I'm hurt and angry, and it's going to take time for me to process this. I'll take some time to figure out if I can forgive you. Thanks for giving me a chance. We started therapy the next week. It was tough, and there were a lot of painful conversations, but I could see that Sarah was genuinely remorseful. She was willing to do whatever it took to repair our relationship. I still wasn't sure if we could ever get back to where we were, but I was willing to give it a shot for the sake of our family. A few months went by, and I started to see changes in Sarah. She was more attentive, more considerate, and more open about her feelings. I still had moments of doubt and anger, but they were becoming less frequent. Our therapist helped us work through the betrayal and rebuild trust. One evening, as we were putting the kids to bed, Jimmy gave me a big hug and said, I love you, Dad. I love you too, buddy. Despite everything, I was determined to be the best father I could be for him and Sarah. I also kept working on my marriage with Sarah. It wasn't easy, and there were times when I wanted to walk away, but we kept pushing through. Over time, the wounds began to heal. I realized that holding on to my anger would only hurt me and the kids. I needed to find a way to forgive, not for Sarah's sake, but for my own peace of mind. Years later, looking back, I could see how far we'd come. Our family had weathered the storm, and though it had left scars, we were stronger for it. Sarah and I had rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of honesty. I'd learned to let go of the past. It wasn't perfect, but it was our life, and I was determined to make the most of it. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more real-life tales of betrayal and redemption. What would you do if you found out your spouse had a secret like this? Share your thoughts in the comments below.